Hello, it's a pleasure to be here virtually, and we're thinking about working with Vue in Markdown, which is something that's really important for us. So to give a bit of a background, thank you for introducing Parent Scheme, but we're a content platform, so it's really important that we are able to have a good experience for our editors who are not necessarily technical people. And to enable them to embed interactive and interesting components in the articles that they write, which of course we don't necessarily completely control from the dev perspective, hence why we're talking about working with Vue in Markdown this evening. So obviously Markdown is something I trust we all love greatly. For me, I think the three things that particularly stand out about it are the fact that it is so simple. You can just write text, and there's a relatively small number of things you can do to format the text that you write. I love that it's versionable, so that I can store the text that I produce or that my content editors produce alongside the code, so that I can take a snapshot and say nothing is changing. It means when you run unit tests, or if you're doing some kind of end-to-end testing, it's very, very straightforward. You can rely on the pages and articles being in place that you're going to test. And it does mean you can also do other really useful things. So I have a test suite that tests that spell checks and tests the rendering of different articles throughout the system. And of course, it's portable. So there are some great CMSs out there that work really well. But the moment you step into a particular framework and vendor, I personally hate the idea of being locked in anywhere. So one thing I like about Markdown is that it is absolutely easy to adopt, and you can take it anywhere with you. And there are lots of tools that will enable you to work with it. I'm guessing we're probably on the same page when it comes to that. It's worth saying as we go on, the aim is to build a Vue setup for using Markdown such that we can use Vue components easily in Markdown, just embed them in the same way you would do anything else. The aim is that you have something that's intuitive for non-programmers, so they can edit it and they don't have to remember the syntax, for example, for passing props to a component embedded in the Markdown. And something that's editable, so has a really easy CMS integration. And we're going to build all of that this evening together. It's worth saying, if anyone has any questions, or if there's something I say that isn't clear, please do ping me and just drop a note in the chat, which I will do my best to watch, but I'm sure that someone will pop on this call and stop me if there's anything I really need to answer. But this is what we're going for. So we want a CMS, we want to be able to embed Vue components in our Markdown files, and we want to make it as easy as possible for editors to edit them and control the flow. So to start with, editable. So we'll set up Netlify CMS to start with. I have thrown up a Git repo called Vue.js Berlin, and it's on my GitHub. I'm just going to send a link through to YouTube channel, and anyone who would like to is welcome to have a look at the code that we've got in place at the moment. And as we make changes, I'll push those up so that folks can see the code. So to start with, we'll look at our repo. It's simple. It's just a straightforward Vue CLI project. This would work. Everything we're going to do would work equally well with something like Nuxt, which is what I normally would be programming in, or in any other framework that you would want to do. So to start with, let's imagine we have got some content. So we have, say, a file here, which we'll use front matter in our Markdown, which means we will put some YAML at the front, which lets us add some metadata. So And then we might have a little bit of Markdown. So great. So we've got that. We also have, at the same time, we should have a server running. Which I will pull up in a moment. There we go. So we can see as we go through what things are there, and we're just at our absolutely basic Hello World app. But before we turn to the view, we're going to make sure we are able to edit the content that we've just created, this introduction page. And the way we're going to do that is we are going to drop a file, static file, into our public assets folder. We're going to call it cms.html. And in that folder, we are simply going to grab the Netlify CMS HTML page. It's amazing how simple it is to get started with Netlify CMS. If you've not used it before, you'll think this is absolutely magic. So we're just going to grab a little bit of text of HTML. That's simply going to pull in the Netlify CMS JavaScript, and it's going to look for a configuration file, a config YAML, which we're going to serve from our static directory as well. So all we need to do here is add in a very few config details. So we're going to put a GitHub backend. It's going to go off the master branch, and the repo is going to be the Vue.js Berlin repo that I've set up that hopefully everyone can see. We have to add a media folder, which we're not actually going to use for this particular presentation, but it needs to exist. And then we're going to add some content. So we're going to just add something called content, but you might want to call it blogs or articles or pages or something else. And we're going to say content for presentation. That's going to be we have our source content folder. So we're going to say that's where it is. We're going to let users create new articles and things. And we're going to have a very, very basic set of fields. So we'll allow people to give a title. And that's just going to be a string. And we'll allow people to edit the body of the text as well, which makes sense. Great. So if I were to save that now and not do anything else, if I were simply to go to our little servlet that's in place and fire up CMS, I will have to first restart the server so it pulls up there. If I were to load CMS, it's going to pull in the Netlify CMS file, and it's going to let me log in with GitHub. Now, this isn't going to work. I'm going to log in, and magically, it actually has worked. Okay. We'll still push what we've got because we have no text there at the moment. So we will add Netlify CMS and simply push that. And we should now have some content. Great. My introduction page has appeared. We created that earlier. My introduction page, top level heading, and some more text. Only I've made a mistake. I've said that this is text, but in fact, it's Markdown. So let's just make a quick change there. In fact, we don't have to commit that. We should just be able to reload the page. And now we have Markdown showing up. Great. So this means I can make changes here, and they will immediately take effect on our site. Brilliant. So our first bit is done. We have now an editable Markdown CMS, which is in place for our Vue.js Vue components in Markdown project. It's worth saying I've used the GitHub backend for the Netlify CMS, which will install a Netlify CMS as a Netlify CMS application to your GitHub account. You can also do this yourself. You can set up an OAuth application. You just need an API endpoint, which is really simple to code. You just stick it at the end on a serverless function or something. You put in your secret, and it can handle the auth for you if you don't want to trust Netlify to handle the authentication. But for simplicity's sake, this evening, I have just gone with the basic Netlify CMS GitHub backend. Okay, so now turning to the next step, we want to make our Vue.js application interactive. We want to be able to stick components in it. So what we're going to do is use something called Front Matter Markdown Loader, which obviously is a Webpack loader and enables us to add Markdown files that export Vue components. So in order to do that, we need to create a new file, a Vue config file, and that is going to need to, if we want to modify the Webpack config, I've got to say I'm not at my best with Vue CLI, but here we go. We need to take our config and add a Markdown rule. And we're going to only apply that to files that end in Markdown. And we are going to then use Front Matter Markdown Loader, which we probably do, in fact, need to just resize this terminal so you can see what I'm doing. We probably do, in fact, need to require that. So that can happen in the background whilst we carry on with this. And the loader will be, again, Front Matter Markdown Loader. And we're probably going to need to set some options. Now, the Front Matter Markdown Loader, if we were to pull that up, has a fairly basic set of options, and they're really cool. So it can export Markdown as HTML. It can simply export the attributes if for whatever reason you're just interested in those, a React component or a Vue component. And that's what we're particularly interested for here. So you can find all of the documentation and details in this particular instance. But what we're going to do is pull in the mode. And I think we probably have to use CJS here. We're going to tap that and return some options, which will be we use Vue component, that's what we're interested in. And yes, thank you. We will auto format that, please. Okay, so I think that should be everything for our Front Matter Markdown Loader. We'll see in a second if that's working. Okay, so head on to app, and we don't really care about anything that's there at the moment. So instead, I just want to show you what it would look like to have a Markdown component in place. So we'll call it introduction. That was our file. And we're now going to import introduction from content introduction.md. And now we should be able simply, sorry, we won't be able to do it quite like that. What comes back from Front Matter Markdown Loader isn't just a Vue component. It also comes back with the attributes, which in the case of introduction will include title. So what we're interested in this particular instance is we want to probably extend you know, actually, this is really bothering me. I'm just going to create a little prettier file. because I would very much not like it to autocorrect me to, I'm sorry, it's probably the least important thing in this moment in time, but I feel it makes a big difference. Back we go to app. So we want to import Vue, or in fact, we'll just do the raw component. So we're going to extend introduction.vue.component. Right. And pull it up now. So it looks like we need to restart. Anyone spots what I've done wrong here? Tab. I think we need tab. And I probably would normally add a .end. We can mix any difference. There we go. And thanks to everybody who spotted that it was tab instead of tab. There we go. So we now have our Markdown file, which is appearing here as a Vue component. So if I were to pull up Vue, you would be able to see we have a Vue component called introduction, and it has a render function, which is what we would expect. Right? So far, so good. Now, this is not actually what we're going to do for our site, because it would get pretty tiresome if you were importing an introduction, each individual bit of file that you wanted. Instead, what we're probably going to want to do for most of what we and yes, prettier, transfer prettier. What we're probably going to want to do for most of what we create is have this be a dynamic component. So we would want something like this. So if we have our component, our page is going to be this. We might even have some attributes from the component itself, like a title, and we'll initialize those to null, and then at created, we'll load it all up. So we don't need this introduction, and we don't need any components here. We just have our basic app, and we're going to have a component is when page exists, we'll make that page. So we'll say created this page equals, and then if you want to code split it, you want to make it a dynamic import. So something like import content introduction. Then we're going to get back an object which is going to have Vue, and we're going to return Vue component. So that's going to give us the component that we want. So if I were to run that and pull it up, we should still work in exactly the same way. We have our top level heading and some more text. So this is now our opportunity to pull our, to make this a little bit more dynamic. So if our path is going to be window location path name, and we're just going to, we're not interested in the / at the beginning, and then we can import just that particular file. So whatever it is, if it's / introduction, we get content introduction.md. And if we try something else, we'll get something else. So let's see, is that going to work for us? No, well, it's not, because we're not on introduction, right? Let's try introduction. And there we go. So now we've not added Vue router or anything, but we have a fully capable, almost a little router of our own, which is just dynamically importing the Markdown file that we need. Obviously, all of them are processed by Webpack, and at this size of the app, we just have one Markdown file. I'm sure it's bundled all together. But as your app gets bigger, this would root split for you. We might want to do one more thing. Say we wanted to get the attributes. I know I talked about that earlier. So obviously we want to return the component. That's what we want to return. But we might want to do something else with the attributes as we get them. So we could say something like this: title is going to be attributes title, right? And then we might do something with that title. So stick it there. And now we have our title attribute pulled into the page. And of course, if you're actually doing this, you would want to put some kind of handling for what if there's a problem with the component, what if it doesn't exist, what if we go to there and I'm sure it's going to throw some kind of error on the console. Yes. So obviously we would normally have to handle that. But for this particular case, we won't bother with that at the moment. We are simply here going to say, throw up a header at the top of the page, stick our title there, and then our component can fall below it. And I am actually feeling the need for a little bit of styling. So I'm just going to import a fun, very, very quick bare HTML styles sheet that I find pretty fun. So that will just immediately give us a nice structure for the bare HTML, which will come in handy because we're not going to do a lot of styling as we go throughout. Okay, so we have a component and it's being dynamically imported, which is great. What if we want to put some kind of dynamic component in there? So we'll just rename this. We'll call this a poll. And we will just create a basic Vue component here. And let's just have it render what gets passed in. Okay, so we've created this little Vue component, and we'll import it. And normally what you might try to do is stick it in here, and then stick it in your Markdown file. It's not going to work. Let's see. Just to show that that's what's going on. We're getting the text, but it's not wrapped in anything. If we were to put something in there which we would expect to show up, nothing's coming up. This is just text. And it's almost certainly wrapped in a little invalid HTML tag poll, which is not what we want. So it turns out it's pretty simple to sort this out and add dynamic components. And that is, we don't return the Vue component that Markdown Loader gives us. Instead, we want to return a new component which extends it. So we're probably already there. But if we just return that a component that extends it, and then components, and we'll pop poll in. We don't care about it there. And now we get it properly coming in. My poll test. So with this kind of approach, you can, and if you're using Vue Router, you could do exactly this kind of thing to generate the routes for the pages. You could iterate over your directory, and you could create different routes for all your different Markdown files. And the component that handles them is something like this. You could even, if you wanted, look in the Markdown file, see what components are needed, and then inject those in the component that you're returning back if you really, really want to make it super performant in terms of well bundled. Okay, but I want to do a little bit more, because we don't just want to make this interactive, which obviously we do. That's the second step. We've made it editable. We've now made it interactive, so we can stick Vue components in, but we actually want to be able to do something a little bit more clever with a component. Now, if you're going to just implement your normal poll component, you might, if you were in control of the whole process and nobody needed to interact with it, which is, of course, how we all prefer to have it, right? We could have something like an array and we could array of options, and then we could simply say something like, we'll make it an unordered list, right? And we give some options, and each of those options is going to be option and options. We simply want to print that out. We'll actually give it a button. Vote for option. Right, and then we have our start encoding tag. And that would basically, it won't render anything right now because I don't think we have any options. But if we were then to go into introduction, we could pass some options, couldn't we? We could say options are test 1, test 2. You see, I'm very inventive with my names for the options we've got. And then we could, paper. So you have a poll. You can vote for test 1, you can vote for test 2. And you could refine that a little bit. Obviously, let's concept of a vote. So I'm going to say if the vote is set, then you voted for vote. And if there is no template, then we're going to allow you to vote, and we'll just give you a little something like that should work. Quickly checking YouTube. No, it was fine. Okay, so we now have some kind of little voting algorithm going on. Obviously, this is not wonderful from a content management perspective because it's very complicated and it relies on effectively an array being passed in, and it means if someone, so for example, we used to have a problem where our content editors would write something like, I'm going to the beach, and they wouldn't realize why there was any problem, but of course that would completely fail because you've got extra quotes. And so this is just not a very intuitive syntax for people who are not programmers. So what we really want is to be able to pass in something like this. Test 1, test 2. And if you're editing that in a Markdown loader, in a Markdown in the CMS, that will render as a list. We might even want to have a title for it. So my poll title. And that's, of course, going to do nothing for us at the moment. So how do we make this interactive? And of course, it's the answer is we can inspect and act based on the, actually, I'm a little distracted. I should make this, I should reset this. We can inspect the children, the slots that are passed to this component. In fact, they can become our props. So it's something that is more intuitive for people who are not programmers. And you can have all kinds of different props based on whatever you find intuitive, or whatever you think they would find intuitive. So you could have some kind of quote, you could have different levels of nesting, of bullets, and there might be other things you could think of as well. We found this works really well for things like creating a checklist component. So you could pass in an array of, an ordered list like this, and then transform that into a set of other components that you render within your component. But basically, you remove as much as possible from the user's control to get wrong. Okay, so how are we going to get the options? We're probably going to want some kind of computed property, and we'll call it options. If you don't mind that particular syntax. If someone has a better idea, I'm happy to do that as well. Options. So first, we're probably going to want to be backwards compatible. So we're just going to want to make sure that we don't overwrite a prop if it is passed to us. So that would be fine. So if we were to do that, it will default to what we've got. We need to check that we are passing, we have some kind of vnodes passed in on slots that we can actually iterate over and do something with. So we'll return if we don't have any. We then want to find the particular vnode that we're looking at. So just to, if I were to reset the, if I were to remove poll as a component, just to show you what's being passed in again, for a sake. Then what we have is, we have here is an unordered list, and we have an H1 element being passed in. So that's what's going to come in. We can further inspect it a little bit in a moment. So just to restore those two possible things, we now have our poll again. So we're going to want to find that unordered list. So we're going to look for it in the vnodes which are passed in. So slots default, if there is it'll be an array of vnodes. So although of course sometimes it's sometimes you get odd things passed in. So you just want to sanitize it as much as possible. So check that there is a tag, and then we want to check that is our unordered list, right? So I think that's going to find it for us if it exists. Now, if it doesn't exist, then we'll just return, again, an empty array. Or if it doesn't have any children, so if there are no list items, then we've got no options. But if there are, we want to iterate through them and produce a list of text strings that become our poll options, right? So we're going to want to look through our children and start with an empty array. This is great use for reduce. So our text is going to be, well, this is actually a little bit complicated. We're going to, I'll simply return nothing. And I want to show you what we're getting when we're looking at these vnodes, because it's not necessarily what you would expect. So if we're looking at our vnodes, well, this is not happening because we have we're not iterating through it at all. And of course, computer properties are lazy. So if you don't use them, they're not evaluated. Right, okay, so we're iterating through it now. And you can see that what's coming back is we've got our tag, we have children. Now the children of each of these list items is actually the text. And the text exists as another vnode, and then there is text in it. So probably what we want is some kind of recursive search function. Something like, you'll make your own functions. If you use this kind of pattern, you'll make your own helper functions. We do something like get text from vnode, pass in a vnode, and then you want to return basically the vnode text might not exist. Return the vnode text as well as something like I don't have time here really to give all the proper error checking that we would want to do in something like this, but I think this will probably work for us. So we're going to want to get the text from the Vue node if we can. If it exists, so if it's not just an empty string or something like that, then we're going to push it into our options. We're going to return those options. And moment of magic. What have we done here? Children, text, to reduce children, text, text. We need to start us off with a string. Great. Okay, so the basically because whatever you pass in, if you don't pass in anything, you actually get what you're iterating through, which is not exactly what we want. It's an object. So here we go. We have test1, test2. And that is pulling through from our Markdown file. So we could say another option, and that is going to immediately regenerate here, and we can go for it. So it's a slightly more intuitive way of doing things. We might also add something like title, pull in that header component. So we might want to say, again, you'll immediately start wanting to create helper functions here, but we'd borrow some of that text. So if there's no default slot, return an empty string. Then we want to find the header. And in this case, we probably want to find any header that the user might put in. So we want it to be something like an H and a digit, and it's probably case insensitive. And we'll test the Vue node tag just to see if that matches. And if so, then that's going to give us our header. And we'll do the same kind of thing if that doesn't exist. And we return, again, an empty string. But if it does, then we simply want to return our helper function. So that should give us a title. And let's see, we could put that up there, couldn't we? And what have we got? My poll title field. There we go, my poll title. So we've pulled in our heading, we've pulled in our options, and we have now what is hopefully a slightly more intuitive way to interact with our Markdown file. I'm going to push all of that, and hopefully that will be a useful starting point. Right, what else could we do? For a start, before I carry on, any questions? I'll just pop that all up. Great. If there are no particular questions, it's been a pleasure. It's been feel free to get in touch with me through any of my channels, through Twitter or my email address on the website. I'd be more than happy to answer anything that occurs to you after the fact.